Welcome to this late edition of Compass, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. I'm Ryan Dunn. It's confession time. I did something I normally do not do. I missed an episode. I'm sure you noticed, right? You noticed? Okay, maybe not, but I did. Scheduling just got rough and my energy level is down. And I felt like I didn't need to throw some half-hearted episode together to fill the calendar. So I missed it. And I feel bad, but I'm hoping to atone for it with some extra content like this. Chances are you kind of feel what I've been feeling lately. I'm hearing a lot about it, that there are quite a number of mentally, emotionally, or physically exhausted people out there right now. And maybe you're one. I've been for sure. I've been reading a book called Siren's Call by journalist Chris Hayes. And the book is about the commodification of our attention. We live in this unprecedented time in terms of outside sources deliberately courting our attention. For so many social media platforms, marketers, entertainers, media outlets, and even politicians, garnering our attention equates to success. So they thrive on grabbing our attention. And that means that we are constantly being pulled in several conflicting directions. I was at this event last weekend, and Gina, my spouse, and I were recruited to help tear down a rather large outdoor sound system. Several other people were recruited as well. Problem was, most of us had little clue as to what really needed to be done. And one person, Ethan, seemed to know what was going on. So poor Ethan, twice a minute, had some well-meaning person asking him what needed to be done or how something needed to be done. And after a while, it just became overwhelming for him. At one point, he crouched behind a large speaker just to grab a break from the barrage of questions for a bit. A lot of us know how Ethan felt in that moment. In fact, if we're engaging much in the digital world, if we're carrying a smartphone or spending time in populated spaces, then we're encountering that kind of overwhelm every day. We might be a little resistant to it by now, but it's still exhausting and stressing. I've seen so many cases where this exhaustion leads to despair. I've wandered into the despair because in light of all the things going on, all that demands our attention, our outrage, action, compassion, empathy, and everything else, what can we do? Every action seems to get covered over by more overwhelm, right? As something else jumps up to our feet, or it pings our phone, or it shouts into our consciousness to demand our attention. So to get practical in this episode, I want to talk about how we can practice some resistance to the attention-grabbing nature of our current existence and alleviate some of that subsequent exhaustion that leads to despair. We need to note, though, that this is not a suggestion to ignore the world around us. Like, for sure, right now, we need to be paying attention. What we don't need to be is constantly distracted and exhausted by that which is demanding our attention in a distracting kind of way. And really, let's be honest, I'm not advocating that we do not simply ignore or hide from the movements of authoritarianism or the harm being done to our neighbors or the polarization of society or any of that. We need to keep our attention on those issues for sure, but we also need to keep ourselves resisting the exhaustion and despair related to those issues. Action is the antithesis to despair. I didn't make that statement up. I read it online someplace. It stuck with me. There are some useful things online, right? Action, though, can sometimes be a little bit problematic. Sometimes it's an issue because misguided actions can be unhelpful. I'm reminded of an instance in which a group of clergy I was with were planning to visit a detention center on the U.S.-Mexico border at the risk of running afoul of local law enforcement. Well, local leaders intervened, noting that they had a working relationship with their local law enforcement, and they didn't want to jeopardize ongoing cooperation. So the group that I was with needed to change our plans for direct action. Also, some of us just aren't in spaces where we can protest all the time, nor are we really convinced that constant public protest would be all that helpful itself. We're not sure where to take our action. And that can lead to frustrated feelings of just related to not feeling useful or feeling exhausted in action as well. I'd like to offer some possible actions then of resistance. And these aren't the take it to streets actions per se. They're more of resistance against the attention-grabbing nature of our current social economy and the feelings of overwhelm then which lead to despair. I want us to have some tools in our back pockets to pull out when we feel like we need to resist, but we aren't sure what to do. When we're spiraling down into despair because there's so much going on and we're unsure that we can do anything about it. We can do something. We can resist the forces that cause us to give up. A great book to check out during this time, or really actually to check out anytime, is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Now, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who was detained in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. For the Jewish Frankl, existence during that time was resistance. The book recounts Viktor's experience in the camp and how it impacted his understanding of human suffering, resilience, and how we cultivate meaning even in the worst of circumstances. In the book, Viktor Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And so Viktor coped with his circumstances by directing his attention towards that which was meaningful to him. He searched for beauty in the power it holds, finding comfort in the sound of a violin. Or he created the manuscript for his book in his mind several times over. He pondered what it would be like to be reunited with his wife. Viktor Frankl found resilience and meaning through the contemplative and the meditative. He directed his attention towards that which was meaningful and life-giving. These became then acts of resistance because he gained life from them. And they can be acts of resistance for us as well, because they direct us back to our own freedom in being able to choose our attitude and our way. And our Christian tradition is full of contemplative and meditative practices or actions through which we can engage in this kind of resistance and reconnect with that which is life-giving. Thomas Merton noted that in this modern age, we are apt to suffer from an inner division. All the attention grabbers in our environment alienate us from our own center. And we lose then our sense of the image of God being within us. And that actually spills out into our perception of other people. Like we forget that they are made in the image of God as well. And really then we become unmoored. We lose a sense of hearing that still voice of the loving Creator. Well, contemplative practices refocus us away from the attention grabbers and back into our inner lives, which both Merton and Frankl suggest are the means for meaningful connection and refreshment. Honestly, that's the big point I wanted to make in this episode. I'm going to suggest a few contemplative practices and walk you through them. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, there's unlikely to be a whole lot of new info here. In fact, the practice that I'll start off with is so mundane, so oft suggested, so cliched that it might make you groan, but it's also tremendously effective and powerful. I want to underscore that. Gina sometimes will text me about having a rough day at work, and every now and then I'll try to engage her in this practice, and normally she'll just tell me to save it in no uncertain terms. And it's just because this practice is so rudimentary, but I'm convinced that it's the basis of a healthy mindset, and I'll die on that hill. It's simply to make a gratitude list, as long or as short as you want. Write it, journal it, note it in your mind. I frame mine as a prayer. Like, God, right now I'm thankful for these 5 things. The glow of the sun through an autumn leaf. My dog enjoying my presence. the weekend laughs that I shared with family, the excitement I feel towards my next workout. And if you're done laughing at me and rolling your eyes because I suggested this practice, I suggest you go ahead and give it a try. I believe the gratitude list is super effective. A related practice that invites a little more reflection is called Examen, or it might be also called Ignatian Examen. Ignatius of Loyola lived from about 1491 through 1556, and Ignatius founded the Jesuit order of monks and compiled many of his spiritual practices into a book or a tome called the Spiritual Exercises. Ignatius recommended that the Jesuits practice a daily reflection that has come to be known as Examen. Actually, he recommended that they practice it twice a day. The Examen is a technique of prayerful reflection covering the events of the day, and it helps practitioners discern God's presence in the events of that day. In its simplest form, really, the Examen invites us through 5 movements. First, to give thanks to God for what you've experienced this day. Secondly, to ask for grace to recognize sins and then to move on for them. It's kind of like a confessional time. 3 is to review the day. 4 is to ask pardon for the day's faults. And then lastly, resolve what are you going to do next? So it's kind of like the so what moment. For my purposes, I've adapted these movements, and actually there's nothing wrong with that. If you search around, you'll find all kinds of adaptations of the Examen, from social media Examen to a diversity Examen and a whole lot more. But in my daily life, these 5 questions really get me thinking. And the first is, when did I experience love? Secondly, when did I miss an opportunity to share love with others? Thirdly, when did I feel most alive? Fourth, when did I feel depleted? And then lastly, where might God be calling me to move or act next? Now, on a different note, it seems like once or twice a month, I just can't get my mind to settle down. And normally this happens while I'm trying to sleep. Actually, normally it looks like me falling asleep and then waking up for no particular reason and being unable to get back to sleep because my brain is on high alert and just feeling anxious. At those times, I'll retreat into centering prayer. And for me, that practice looks like this. I choose a word representative of the divine. I often default to Jesus or Lord or mercy. I think I choose Lord because I sometimes have a problem with authority, and Lord kind of pulls me back into a healthier alignment with the idea of Jesus being the ultimate authority in my life. That's really helpful for me. Anyways, I'll just focus on that word until I drift off to sleep. Whenever my mind starts to wander back towards the anxious thoughts that I was having, I go back to that sacred word. And oftentimes in my mind, I just see the word in big white block letters against a black backdrop. And we're supposed to keep our minds clear, but for me, that's a little helpful trick. If you want to do this during waking hours, the suggestion is to set a timer and to go for it. You may want to start short and then extend. I've gone as long as 30 minutes myself. I'm sure some people have spent whole days engaged in the centering prayer. Another mind-settling contemplative practice is breath prayer, or really that can kind of be a mantra. In breath prayer, you simply mentally recite a word or phrase as you inhale and recite another word or phrase as you exhale. And maybe the most famous phrase is known as the Jesus prayer. As you inhale, you say, "Have mercy on me," and then exhale and recite "a sinner" and repeat as needed. You could put just about any short phrase or mantra into that rhythm, though. I often try to adapt psalms or other pieces of scripture for breath prayers to share on social media. So you get Amos 5 and breathing in while saying "let justice," and then breathe out while saying "roll like water." Or you can adopt Psalm 79 sounding like breathing in while reciting "help us," and breathing out while reciting "for your glory." There's an adaptation for breath prayer that moves away from the mantra recitation and instead focuses on receiving and releasing. So as you breathe in, you focus on receiving God's peace, and then exhale and release anxiety. or you inhale to receive compassion and exhale to release apathy, or inhale to receive gentleness and exhale to release self-doubt. Various forms of pilgrimage serve as contemplative practices as well. Now, often we think of pilgrimage as a grand undertaking to a far off place, right? Like a trip to Bethlehem or walking the Camino de Santiago. However, pilgrimage can be any journey of mental movement. I think for some people, the journey to the mailbox could be a pilgrimage if it's done with intention. The journey itself becomes a means for contemplating the presence of God in our lives. So I would suggest that a daily pilgrimage exclude the use of, say, earbuds and cell phones, and instead allow our minds to become aware of the setting in which we're in. In this way, a lunchtime walk to go to the end of the road and back could be a pilgrimage if you have the intention of kind of dialing into the presence of God during that movement. There are sedentary pilgrimages as well, and that might involve virtually visiting some kind of holy site in order to ground oneself in a sense of place or to foster a connection to the past. Or it could look like taking a virtual journey through a labyrinth. A labyrinth is a complex path that takes you on a symbolic journey and creates space to unwind and think, in particular about our relationships with ourselves and our planet and with God. The path has 3 stages. There's the inward journey where you're moving to the center of the labyrinth. There's actually being in the center. And then there's the outward journey. And the theme of the inward journey is to let go of the things which might hinder our wholeness or our inner approach to God. It's to let go of those distractions or those attention grabbers. The center of the labyrinth is a space of meditative prayer and peace. And then the theme of the outward journey is, again, to refocus on those relationships, all seen in the light of our relationship with God. There you go. This is a handful of ideas for you. There's so many more. And these practices are relative. Like some practices will connect with some and others will connect, of course, with others. The point, however, is the connection, not so much the specific practice. So in any case, I hope this episode has inspired you to find the meaningful way that might be able to alleviate or interrupt the spiral of despair and overwhelm and help you move towards hope in meaning. That's what this podcast at large is really about. So I hope you'll join us again next week for another another episode of Compass. If you want to dig deeper into any of the topics that we've discussed here, well, be sure to visit our website at umc.org/compass. There you'll find detailed episode notes plus a full library of past episodes to keep you inspired. We're grateful to the team at United Methodist Communications for making this podcast possible. And of course, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to Compass on your favorite podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews help others discover the stories of hope and inspiration that we love to share. Thanks for journeying with us. We'll see you next time. Peace.